Welcome to Season 6 of How I Made It Through. As I've said before, it is often through pain and suffering that we learn our most profound lessons. It is through courageously exploring the inner landscape of our lives and seeking healing that we transform. Joining me this season is my newest co-host, Bernadette Thompson. Bernadette and I invite you to join us, now twice a week, as we continue to explore the extraordinary stories of those who've had near-death and spiritually transformative experiences, or are simply wise and old souls sent here to help the collective awaken and heal. Our show reminds us that death of the body does not mean death of the soul, and that indeed we do transition into the wonder of the afterlife and come back again and again and again. Our hope is that each episode will serve as inspiration for your own spiritual discovery. We thank you for joining us in this powerful learning and ask that you subscribe, comment, like, and share. Together, we can spread the growing awareness that we are all infinite souls sent to Earth School at this very unique and miraculous time in human evolution. Welcome to How I Made It Through, Jacob Cooper.
Hi, it's such an honor to be on your podcast, Diabs. I'm a big fan of your work, and I love the direction that this channel is going in. So it's just an honor to be a part of your incredible work that you're doing here.
Thank you. Well, before I read your bio, I have to say a
Thank you,
number of
Sam.
years ago, I encountered you. I've listened to your story a couple of
Wow.
times, and I was like, your story, among a handful of others, really was what ignited my deep dive and fascination with NDEs and understanding even more intimately through the people who've had them, why they matter so much and what they say to us. So, such an honor.
Well, gosh, I think that's the nicest thing someone has ever said to me in my entire life. So thank you. That's the whole point of the sharings of these things is to make an impact and inspire someone. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Let me go ahead and read your bio and then we'll just dive into the conversation so folks know who you are. Passionate about promoting healing, Jacob L. Cooper, bestselling author of Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, is a sought after speaker on grief, wisdom, and consciousness, offering meditation and mindfulness seminars to help others find purpose and overcome fears of life after death. As a clinical social worker, Reiki master, and certified hypnotherapist specializing in past life regression, Jacob uses his extensive personal and professional experience to empower one soul at a time. He also hosts the weekly podcast, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Fascinating.
Yes.
All right. So, what's really unique, and they're all so unique, but I was just asking before we started hitting the record and getting this going for the audience. You were such a young little boy when you had yours. Is that the right place to start, you sharing your actual NDE?
I I know you're very intuitive, so I'll follow your lead as to
Yeah.
where you feel this to go. But that's usually a starting point of my conversations and interviews because I was in many ways the start of my life and the new beginning. And it just told me that death was just a new beginning. There was no such thing as death, and I experienced that at a young age. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when you hear of other near death experiencers, the majority of which we know have their NDEs when they're in their middle years of life, and they may be working corporate jobs or in media. Like it seems like every NDE is in like media to me or something like that, which is a nice segue for the work that they're doing. But for myself, it's a little bit more of a rare positionality because I was just 2 years old. But it does happen. It is a lot more common than you would think. In fact, NDE researchers, one of the NDE researchers who's on Mount Rushmore in my eyes of NDE researchers, her name is PMH Atwater. She specializes in actually infant and childhood NDEs, and she's really found that people have infancy or childhood NDEs take around 20 to 30 years to really process and integrate their experiences. It's not that they don't know what happened to them. It's not that they don't remember it. For every NDE, it's just that the vocabulary, the vernacular is very incongruent with we don't have the tools to really articulate these things. And each interview I do my best that I can. But she was spot on in that assessment, where it took me around 2 decades to get out of the proverbial NDE closet and to start to share my story. In fact, this would be the ninth year that
Mm.
I've been sharing my NDE. I started in, I think around 2016, around April of 2016 was when I first started publicly sharing my NDE.
Well, so glad you do. So, just if you would, what happened?
Yeah, I was a child, like we said, 3 years old, September of 1993. To give context, at the time, my parents didn't know, nor would I know, because I'm 3 years old. What do I know? But I had whooping cough, otherwise known as pertussis, at the time. But no one really knew it was such a serious thing. I went to a playground. It was right before the what's called the Jewish high holiday of Yom Kippur, which,
Mhm.
uh, if you're familiar with it, that's otherwise known as the Day of Atonement, in which the soul is getting itself ready to meet the Creator and trying to clean its slate, so to speak. Little did I know that I was about to meet the Creator, but it was a lot more in an abrupt, very direct way, not in a religious sense or through prayer or through ritual. But this is a very direct engagement with the Creator. My parents were not with me when I had my NDE, to give context. I was with people that took care of me. They were, my parents' really good friends and kind of like my godmother, so to speak. And one of the person's name, actually, who was with me, her name was Rhonda. And there's a Beach Boys song that I always used to call, and I always used to say, "Help me, Rhonda," because she was a part of saving my life. She's since celebrated her continuation day and passed on around 2 3 years ago. But I give credit to Rhonda and Ken for saving my life. But I went to a playground. I climbed a ladder going up into a slide, and I just began to get into this coughing spree, which led to suffocation. There was nothing for me to hold on to, which to this day is the most traumatizing moment of my life. I mean, because sometimes we take the breath and life for granted. Breath to me is life. Without breath, there is no life here. But soon that I was able to find that breath is eternal, that there's a breath that goes beyond our own human breath. And some people call that the breath of creation. Certainly, in my religious Jewish faith, we call the word spirit, it's translated as the breath or the wind of God. And, so my human breath was taken from me due to whooping cough, which is common for people, particularly infants and children who have whooping cough. It could be fatal if left untreated. I was even reading a book. I believe it was either Signs, or I forget, or I think it was A Light Between Us. But there was a local to me best-selling New York Times best-selling author named Laura Lynn Jackson. I don't know if you know who Laura is. She's one of the most prominent mediums on the planet, but she spoke about her encounter with whooping cough as an adult and how severe that was. So yes, we don't really recognize how we tend to stigmatize, upper respiratory conditions, and people with asthma actually have a medical disability that people are like, oh, it's no big deal, whatever. But for some reason, when it comes to respiratory conditions, people just tend to underestimate it or pathologize it, or just kind of like think it that it's not that big of a deal. But the breath is one of the most important things. But yeah, certainly suffocation was happening. Everything in my body began to shut down, because yeah, if you're not breathing, I'm not a biologist or a doctor, but you're not getting proper oxygen to your brain, to your bloodstream, and the body can't work. And the last thing I remembered was the capacity to feel my own brain. And I just felt my brain just snap in half, and it was like the loudest sound that I ever heard.
Mm.
And literally, my brain cracked open, and that's when God came in. And so we have that euphemism, but that happened to me literally, where my brain cracked open, and that's when the spirit realm and God came in, which certainly there's a lot of NDE research to really speak on that, incredible phenomena that happens with NDEers. But in the short of it, I was able to really open myself up to the spirit realm, which is always inside of us, always around us. But
Mhm.
sometimes we have our human blinders on
Mhm.
to simplify things. You'd imagine, I don't know, if you're driving in a car, you try to listen to every radio station at once, like you wouldn't be able to hear a thing. So it's just for us, for our own sanity, we need to kind of tune into one station here in the physical. And we're meant to live a life in the physical, but I was able to see my profound encounter with my guardian angels or spirit guides that were to the right side and left side of me. It was a male and female guide, and they were the most beautiful, immaculate beings. I mean, geez, I always give this analogy, but it's funny. Just last night, I was watching Demi Moore on the Golden Globes, and beautiful Scorpio, but one of my biggest Hollywood celebrity crushes of all time. Everyone knows that about me. She's absolutely stunning. My guides, nothing against Demi Moore, my guides are like looking at Demi Moore times like a million. But yeah, they were so gorgeous, and that's all of our guides. They are beyond words, but they had such an immense love, and they knew who I was, and I just in the moment felt so embarrassed, like, oh my god, I just thought I was just living my life on my own box, but there's so much around us, and I learned that from my NDE that we have such a small percentage of reality that we're focusing on in the human, and
Mhm.
there's such an intelligence
Mhm.
and an awareness beyond ourselves. This is such a collective and team effort. But yes, certainly I was on the floor. The people that went to the playground with me were trying to call my name. I was able to see them, but they couldn't see me. They were just looking at the body, and I felt my form adjacent to my body. And I was able to just look at all the people around me, and I saw their spirit guides and angels around them and
Wow.
their auras. And they, in the human context, like they didn't strike me as like the Dalai Lama or anything. There was like the guy that was there was kind of like a CPA, very grounded guy. But again, just really reinforces how we are all, magnificent spiritual beings at our core, despite, what we see on the surface level with our own given roles that we play in method acting in this theory of life. But all of a sudden, I looked up and I saw just an infinite array of angels that were floating right in front of me. And these angels were different than the guides because they, unlike the guides, had their own uniformal names and different characteristics, and they were older in their presentations. Where the angels that I saw were very uniformal and they were very childlike, and they were literally right in front of me. It's like we have this field of reality, and you just tune it up a little bit. This
Mhm.
whole angelic field is all around us. It's this little separation of difference, and we have all these beautiful angels around us at all times. I mean, literally, I have one behind me, but it's just amazing how what I was able to really learn that the other side or heaven is not in some ways. When I was in my ND, it felt like millions of miles away from this reality, but also the other side is right here. It's all around us. And I
Mhm.
just almost had to pinch myself because they were right in front of me, but they were just unconditionally sending love, sending warmth without expecting anything in return. It was purely unconditional love in the purest form. And there's nothing that I could compare it to. I mean, I guess I could look at Mother Teresa, but I don't nothing. I can't compare it to anything of this reality that I've ever seen. And then slowly I had Soul Family come forward with those who are not familiar with. You know, I view life as kind of like a stage or a theater where we have different roles and different parts of the play, but we're all a part of a similar cast. And some of that cast is over here in the physical, and some of the cast is over there on the other side. But we spend lifetimes and lifetimes in and lifetimes out with a lot of the same, soul family, nuclear soul family. I think we're all a part of one soul family, but
Mhm.
it's more so from a nuclear standpoint. And then, the question was posed: would I stay on the other side or would I continue in my life? And which is rare. When I listen to near death experience researchers, they'll probably say around 70% of people are told, it's not your time. They're not given autonomy. They're told there's other, karma or dharma to really work on. Uh, but for myself, for whatever reason, I'm not a perfect being. that was just the way that it was. I don't know why to this day I was given autonomy. That wasn't really explained to me. But I just said, well, if I do stay, what will my life look like? Because I had concerns for my parents and how they would process this loss and what would I look like? Why am I here? Who am I? What is, this life going to look like? And slowly but surely, I had a lot of flashing images, not only of this lifetime and the viewpoint of others. And this is commonly referred to as a life review, but this also had a life review that went beyond this lifetime. And I was able to see myself just spanning the globe, going from culture to culture, civilization to civilization, different lifetimes. In the lifetime that most sticks with me to this day, and I think that has the most resonance and explanation for why I had an NDE in many ways, was a life when I, my last lifetime, which has been evidentially read by different mediums and psychics prior to me ever saying a word publicly, when I was in my later teens and early 20s. But I had a lifetime in which I, as a mental health therapist, I don't try to stigmatize suicide or criminalize it. I don't use the word commit when it comes to suicide, much like you wouldn't use the word commit for a heart attack or brain cancer. To me, it's not something I stigmatize or pathologize. But I did make that decision, and I crossed over, and I saw that I was forgiven and I was loved, and the pain that I felt was understood. But I also saw that things would have worked themselves out, and the NDE was what felt very similar to that last lifetime, where all of a sudden my back was against the wall. There was nothing to hold on to. I felt like I was drowning, and there wasn't anything to latch onto. And instead of trying to fight it or trying to survive, I was able to surrender to the breath of eternity. I was able to surrender to this power inside of me, and that allowed me to survive death, or the illusion of death, rather. And from seeing that, I just saw that my NDE was very much tied into that last lifetime. And I saw myself speaking in front of a lot of people. And I said, as beautiful as heaven is, the other side is, the capacity to bring it on this earth is something that I can't deny. And heaven will always be there. But this window, um, who am I to say no to that? And with that thought, I was woken up in a hospital bed, and the rest is kind of history. I was rushed by the ambulance to the hospital, and I stayed there for a couple of days, and I was on a nebulizer for quite some time and inhalers. But thank God I became well, I think I'm a legend in my own mind as an athlete. But I just ran 7 miles this morning, and my health is okay. My doctors say that, so thank God I was able to heal from that brush with death. But anyway, I know I'm from New York, so I'm probably talking a mile a minute, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that we have here. But that's a little bit the short of the narrative. But to preface it, I'm a big believer in stories, and one of the individuals that has the most impact in my life, his name is Elie Wiesel. He was a survivor of the concentration camps and a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But he has a quote that said that God created us because God loves stories, and all of our lives and all that we do are just the stories to God. And so what happened to me was just pretty cool, but the rest of my life is about the dharma, the meaning, the essence of it. And that's what I try to do in every interview and every book that I publish, is just to provide more meaning and to make spirituality with practicality, as I say. you know
I have so many questions that I want to ask. But the thing that's coming up for me the most is you were this little 3-year-old who had this NDE, but when you crossed, it doesn't sound like you were a 3-year-old. Like, can you talk a little bit about, um, what that felt like, or did that understanding, because it was an amazing visit on the other side.
Yeah. Well, I think in this lifetime, there's something called an ego, which is this construct that we have of ourselves. And part of that ego is based in this lifetime, where we take on genders, cultures, religions, jobs, income. And there's all these narratives that become a part of how we perceive ourselves. And while I am a believer that two things could be true at the same time, while in this reality we're probably all those things, in the ultimate reality, you know, who we are in this lifetime is just a chapter of the eternal encyclopedia of the soul. So it's like reading a book and defining the whole book by one page or one chapter. You know, that's an undeniable part of the book, but it's not the full story. And so we have a lot of sayings that we commonly throw out in the metaphysical and spiritual community. And one of those sayings is, we are infinite spiritual being having a human experience. And so what does that mean? That means that we are timeless, we are ageless. And so what I learned in my NDE when I crossed over was I was able to get in touch with the depths of my soul, which went far beyond the construct or the ego of myself as a 3-year-old. And while I loved that young boy and I wanted to see the trajectory of that life, and that was a part of me staying in a way where I just wanted to see how the story would look like and what this journey would be like. You know, that wasn't what I was experiencing in my NDE. Um, it was a full blown engagement with the eternal soul, and the soul goes beyond chronological age. The soul is just merely experiencing itself in this body in this lifetime, but it's not the full degree of the totality of the soul. The soul is infinite and eternal, and it goes beyond, you know, anything that we think that we are, you know, in many ways. So I think in order to find yourself, you have to, in many ways, be willing to lose that part of yourself, because that part of yourself in that box informs belief, and the NDE just blew away that box. And you know, it was hard, but it just was coming back home, and it reminded me of some of the amnesia that I even had as a 3-year-old, you know, and letting that go, and later in life being empowered to live that way in a world that wanted me to forget everything about myself in a way.
Yeah, well, I want to piggyback off of Bernadette's question. For me, the word that comes up is integrating it. So you were connected, not in the chronological age of a 3-year-old, but
Mhm.
back to the expansiveness of your soul. But then you did return into the body and into the story and onto the stage of the little
Mhm.
3-year-old. And again, the amnesia is not without purpose. It is very
Mhm.
purposeful, but you were cracked open. So, how did you integrate this and when did you integrate this? Because you still have to go through the developmental milestones of learning to tie your shoe and, having, little temper tantrums and all the things that make a child as they learn how to navigate this world.
Mhm.
When did this awareness and integration start to happen?
Yeah, no, it's hard to pinpoint. I mean, I remember very little about my childhood or infancy years, but the only things that I remember are those of like the higher realms. I think a lot of that has to do with being in touch with nonlinear reality. And, you know, after having my NDE, my brain was very much changed, and you know, went through a TBI. And so I learned the dichotomy of the brain and the mind from a very young age, that the brain was not the producer of the mind, but rather just the filter of it. But I just remember feeling this sliver of light that was able to go in through my brain when I was in preschool, and I was able to cross over and go to the other side on a regular basis. And I was having a lot of, it's common with end of ears, but they're able to have a lot of after effect gifts from their NDE.
Mhm.
And so that was happening to me, where throughout my childhood, premonitions were of a regular basis, dreams were very deep. And also, I was able to have a lot of interdimensional awareness, where I was able to see a lot of spirits and connect to loved ones. And one day I just remember turning to a classmate, you know, seeing spirits all throughout the classroom. And I turned to the classmate and I just said, "Do you see what I'm seeing? Do you see, you know, this?" And the classmate just looked at me with this bewildered look. And it was just, it felt like a punch to the gut. It's just like,
Mm.
it's like, I know that I'm in this world, but I know that I'm now very alone in this world. And I felt
Yeah.
very alienated from my surroundings. And my parents, while being lovely people, I just saw them as different people. I saw them as people who, might have biologically created me, and parents, what was their role in this lifetime, but they didn't create my essence, and they weren't like my eternal parents. They were just playing their roles as parents. So initially and throughout a lot of my childhood, there was a great deal of defiance. I was not just this, totally perfect, loving kid. I was difficult in a sense that things just did not make sense, and I would have pushback against them. But there had to come a point where, um, I recently came across a quote by Charles Darwin, talk about survival of the fittest, and he said, "It's not the smartest, it's not the strongest. It's usually the ones who are most adaptable who are able to survive." And for me to survive, I needed to learn how to be a kid. I needed to learn how to have radical acceptance. But to thrive, I needed to make sense out of this in its proper time. So that took me some time to see this as a blessing rather than a curse, because every kid, what's a prescription is just being normal. That's the coolest thing you could do as a kid.
Absolutely.
And once you become an adult, you're like, normal is like the worst thing in the world. It's like we have allergies to it, because what normal people have ever changed the world?
Yeah.
It's really being unique is how we change the world. But yeah, I was getting teased from kids calling me weirdo. People didn't know what to make of me.
Sure.
I was alienated, but I eventually learned, how to compartmentalize that part of me. And I kept that only to myself. I didn't tell anyone. Even my closest friends to this day are like, "I never knew you had that." And I'm like, well, it was something very sacred to my soul, and I just felt it wasn't appropriate to tell it, because it wasn't right, and it wasn't going to be used in the right hands that were able to understand it.
I have a question. As as somebody that has also, I now have this understanding. I have a guide that is with me. I have not been through an NDE, but as you're talking, some of these feelings are coming up in me, as even the loneliness sometimes, which is, and I think that's
Sure.
why what Kristin and I are doing is surrounding ourselves with people who understand that there's more to life, and wanting to. But the question I have still goes back to a little bit about you being small. Is did you remember this? I mean, when from the moment you woke up, did you know, like, always remember that you had this? You did.
Always, never left me. In fact, shortly after I had my NDE, I didn't know this. My dad he's more of the religious left brain, New York Times reading intellectual type. So he's not like into the metaphysical woo woo world, but he's also a therapist too, like I said. But he told me recently that I came up to him. I remember this, but I'll take credit for it. But I said, "Hey, Dad, remember when I was rushed by the ambulance, went to the hospital?" And I'm using my language here today, but I said something along the lines of, you know, um, it's not going to make sense to you, so I'm not even going to talk about what happened. But one day you'll understand what happened to me when 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 I went to the ambulance to the hospital. So yeah, the timing wasn't right. On my channel, there's a guest that I've interviewed twice. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Her name is Lorna Byrne. Lorna Byrne. She's an Irish mystic and best-selling author, but she wrote a book called, I'm not trying to do a plug here, but her book was called Angels in My Hair. Great book, but she had a childhood NDE like myself. And like myself, she was told by her guides to not tell anyone. And she went through the majority of her childhood or teenage years, keeping this very close to her. The reason is you want to be careful with your vulnerability, whether that's grief or something difficult happened to you, or something, like myself, very profound, particularly in the culture that I grew up with, because the culture that I grew up with was very religious, very this is the way, and it ostracized like any answers that you would have within. It was like the path was outside of you, it was not inside of you. So creative discoveries of truth is not a friend of religion. Religion seeks to control, and there's a lot of fear basis behind it, which is why reincarnation was banned from Christianity for a sense, because hey, if you, I don't know, died before and came back, well, where's the fear mongering of going to
Exactly.
hell and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
where
So,
is that weapon?
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah. So,
control.
um, but yeah, I definitely kept it very close to heart, and I didn't tell anyone because it just wasn't the right timing.
You know, Jacob, your story of your NDE talks about what awaits us in that thin little veil between this reality and then returning home. I really appreciate that so much of your purpose is around alleviating any fear people have about dying. Can you speak more to what you've learned both from your own NDE as well as all the research and interviews you've conducted about heaven and the afterlife?
Yeah, I really felt in my NDE that heaven is a frequency. And so we have this reality where we're vibrating at a certain rate, and heaven is just a higher vibrational frequency. And so that's why people who are, I believe, mediums or intuitives, for them, they're connecting to higher consciousness. They're connecting to heaven because their energy is able to really have a match with the frequency of the other side. And so for us, really, when if you want to get to heaven, you just increase your frequency, and you're already able to have that within the body. But there's many. Yeah, the other side in heaven has objectivity and subjectivity. I think everyone has their own bliss. Like my version of heaven is probably going to be different than Kristin and Bernadette's. Like, the reason why I say that is the things that we do over here is not just thrown out the wayside and meaningless. How we live over here is some of the things that will carry over to our heaven. So in a sense that we're expanding heaven, by living the lives that we're doing here and finding the joy, finding the meaning. So not only are we able to enjoy this lifetime, but there is a correlation with what we do over here and what we carry over there. And by that I mean the things that we love. Um, and ever it's one of my favorite quotes by Wayne Dyer of all time, and someone who's definitely a teacher of mine. But he was once asked, who is God to you, and how does one find God? And Wayne would always say, God, I understand by the word enthusiasm. And the person's like, what are you talking about? Enthusiasm? That's nice, but whatever. But enthusiasm has that Greek word entheos, which means the divine within. And so when you're finding things that you're enthusiastic about this world in your life, you're connecting to your divinity. And that's something that you're going to carry over when you do go to heaven. But the other side of heaven is just a vibrational frequency of unconditional love, support. It has really nothing that we can compare it to with this reality. Now, if we're all able to really connect to that light that we have within, then I think it will become a lot more familiar and less of a transition when we do cross over, because I think each person has that light of heaven, that divine spark. And if you're able to connect to that, expand to that, then you don't have to wait to die to go to heaven. You're already there.
Mhm.
And the impact that you have is creating a heaven on earth. So a lot of people talk of life as a very dark place, but they don't remember that they are the light. They have light, and that should be the emphasis when you're seeing a lot of darkness. And that's a lot of the work that you're doing with this podcast, is just bringing the light to people when everyone's just getting very neurotic or obsessed with the darkness, not remembering that they have this responsibility of this light.
Mm.
But my NDE reminded me that the allegorical symbology of it, that I was just a child in a playground. And since then I'm like, all right, so out of all places, why was it in a playground? It could have been, I don't know, it could have been like anywhere, like at a pizza store, or like a deli. Like, why was it at a playground? And I think everything has a reason. And when I look back on it, playground is very symbolic of this life. Like, we are all children in the eternal playground of God, here as our brothers and sisters keeper, to take care of one another. And it wasn't was it I don't think my ND is so much about me. It's more so to be able to articulate to other people. And that's when there's a beauty behind it, because going through it, it was, immense. It was like a manic depressive situation where there's immense amount of highs and euphoria. There's also a great deal of trauma, and it's just very difficult to go through at such young age. But I say that the universe or God gives us things that we're able to handle, and we're able to eventually find the meaning past the trauma and the pain. And through the trauma and the pain, we could find the meaning. But yeah, it was definitely a double-edged sword at such a young age to have something so scary, so traumatic,
Yeah.
and not having like the right personnel to process with or the tools to articulate this. But I've really learned that, um, we're eternal, we don't die, and heaven is just our natural state. And we're connected to love, we're connected to heaven, in this life. And if we're learning about this stuff, it's not that big of a transition for it. But I think a lot of people have been very disempowered where they look at heaven in the hands of the powerful or those who they may be spiritual, and they don't recognize that they also have keys to it. And Jesus said that himself, that the kingdom of heaven in me is in you too. And I think the more people hear these NDEs, they could have a little bit of a reminder that they're eternal. And I think more and more people listening to NDEs, because there's something oddly familiar about what we're talking about,
Yeah.
that allows people to remember, hey, wow, there's something familiar about what they're saying. And that could cause some curiosity and inner exploration and empowerment, on their paths.
So I'm fascinated, and I know this might be a little bit taking a little bit of a detour. So,
Sure.
Kristen, if you have a question, hold on to it. But I love the name. That you're talking about Jacob's Ladder.
Right.
I even I grew up Catholic, but I've always had this deep fascination with ancient and in ancient history, even before Judaism was really, Hebrew, the language. And so Jacob's ladder has always been to me of climbing to heaven,
Yeah.
is that, and so I'm just curious. And I actually even have had a meditation that when I climbed the ladder, that Jesus was there. So that's what brought this up in my mind. But I'm curious where Jacob's ladder came for you and what the meaning is that you have for it.
Yeah, well, both of my books are kind of play in homages to things that inspired me. Life After Breath is a homage to my friend Dr. Raymond Moody's Life After Life, but also signifies, hey, I lost my breath, but there was a continuity of life, and how breath is life in many ways. But the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder was the allegory of my NDE, where I had my NDE in a playground on a ladder going up on a slide. And so
Hmm.
that's allegorical for Jacob, who was fleeing from his brother Esau, who was very upset with the covenant that Jacob received it and Esau didn't. And he was fleeing for his life. He had death run right in front of him. His brother was trying to kill him, Esau. And he went and he slept on a bed of rocks in a place that I've been to. It's in Israel. It's called Beit El. Beit is house, El is God. So it's translated as a house of God. But Jacob had his dream at Beit El, Bethel, Israel, and he saw just angels going up and down the ladder. And then Jacob was eventually able to wrestle his demons, and that's when it became from Jacob. He went to becoming Israel. And since there's been a lot of inspirations by Jacob's ladder. I know William Blake was someone who's definitely impacted by Jacob's ladder and his work. But to me, Jacob's ladder, it represents the different rungs, the different dimensions. I was listening to Carolyn Miss, and she has a great analogy with spiritual evolution. She says, I don't know, some people could be on the first floor of an apartment and you only see a certain kind of, thing in this lifetime. But then you ascend, you get to the second floor, third floor, and you start to see some bushes, and then maybe you see some streets, and then you see a little bit more. And so I use that because I like to make these things tangible. But spirituality is no different. It's just about expanding consciousness. And as you get higher and higher, you're able to, the higher you go, the more that you can see, the more you connect to. And each lifetime is an opportunity to continually ascend in our love, in our awareness, and I think the soul is all knowing, but once it's able to apply those things, it becomes those things. And so that's what we're here not just for the learning, but for even further than learning is the embodiment of what we know. And when we do that, we become it. So there's no separation with what we know and who we are. But Jacob's ladder is very much about spiritual evolution to me and ascension. And that was one of the lessons from my NDE that I reference, and was certainly the reference in my title. But yeah, Jacob running away from life, seeing angels, and me seeing death in front of me, and just surrendering, with a ladder, and being able to see a higher realm past, death, and to see, that death in many ways brings a lot of clarity of the eternity of the soul. And I notice this with a lot of people that I work with who have lost loved ones, who grieve. And, when they're going through crises, those could be shakeups of the soul. But all of a sudden, through that tragedy, through that turmoil, they're able to see a different, reality from that. So there's a lot of correlationship with evolution and going through something very challenging, in a bit of an existential crisis.
Mhm.
Well, I think, Bernadette, your question is actually a great segue for my next question. And I'm just weaving together a lot of what you're saying. So I'm going to say that back,
Mm.
which is the awareness that we are these eternal souls. And like Jesus says, the light that is within me is also within you.
Sure.
So it's the rungs of the ladder that we recognize that if we can raise our frequency to the vibration of love and the remembrance or the dispelling of the illusion that this is all that there is, right? That we can really fulfill our purpose to have these experiences and this embodiment here. What are some practical, was that fair that I characterized that
Yeah,
okay?
and I think the more that we do that, the more that we don't have to wait to get to heaven, the more that we're creating it as a whole
Right.
here with
Well
that
said. That's what I'm
heavenly
trying to say.
frequency. Yeah,
That
I think
heavenly frequency.
we're
So what I want to ask Jacob is, what are some practical tools that people can begin to practice to keep that alive and engaged? Because
yeah.
the reason I ask is that they're like, wow, that's amazing, and I want to have heaven on earth. And how? What's your advice?
Yeah. Well, certainly I'm still here, which means that I haven't perfected that. I think if I had, why would I be here in many ways? But I think sometimes we're here because we're better served in this reality than over there. And once we're able to be used better on the other side, then we're called over there. It's a great question. There's certainly a lot of modalities, but I think it starts with the self. When we're able to really learn unconditional love towards the self,
Mhm.
and how to really heal, and how to love not just the things that are convenient or the things that we were really programmed to love, but loving ourselves for inner being, is a big start. And I think so much of our love from ourselves is getting our own narratives. I mean, so much of self-love is rooted in narratives that have been handed down from generations to generations off of what constitutes permission to love ourselves. And so
Yeah.
there's a big dynamic of our own doing and our inner being. The better we do, the more that we feel our being. And so it's no wonder why there's so much instability, because the doing and the evaluation of the doing is always changing. You get on the scale, you're one or two, and we all probably are like that now at the holidays, like, oh my God, I hate myself on that, but then remind myself, hey, I am not a body, I have a body. There's something, beyond my job, my house, even my relationships. No matter what happens to me, there is something beyond all these things that I hold to as centerpiece with my identity. And
Yeah.
if we're able to fall, I think to me, as corny as it sounds, the soul has to be a part of the solution. That's what we call solution. And that is the key to really learning how to love yourself, is when you're able to really love your soul, get in touch with your soul. And
Mhm.
once you do that, everything changes. You start to look at life through a more forgiving, softer, more honest way, and you're able to really see people for not what they're representing, but who they are on a deeper context. And you're
Mhm.
able to look at life through the God lens. And
Mm.
that to me is a lot about creating heaven on earth. And so, you could go to these yoga retreats, you could chant, you could do all these fancy schmancy things. But if you're not understanding love, if you're not, getting to that place, if you're not feeling forgiveness, all those things are just all well and good, but it's missing the essence. So
Mhm.
I think it starts, as cliche as that sounds, it starts with the self, and then from that point, then you're able to look at this life through a different lens.
I agree. I agree with you. And spirit says that to me, that we have to go within, and that's the work that we're here to do, is to go within. But I also think it's so hard, as you alluded to, all of the forces or energy around us that are pulling us to not focus on ourselves, and to not, and reminding us of all the things that we think we've done wrong, and so it's so hard
Yeah.
to bring that in. Is there anything that you do that helps you to stay in that, um, center? Like, is there a meditation or something that you do yourself, or any kind of practice that helps you stay in the the spirit of, not Jacob, but your spiritual self?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think we're all in bodies of water in this life. Water represents spirituality, but the less holes that we have in our boat, the more like we're less likely to be like the Titanic. And so that's why that self-care is so important, so that we can navigate the waters of life, and go through, even the most tumultuous tides that come our way. But for me, there's a lot of different, avenues of self work that I do. But I find that the biggest way that I could release is listening to, touching music. For me, um, when I'm able to cry is when I'm able to feel an immense amount of love and joy and gratitude, and an appreciation for each person, each moment. So I think for me, letting out a good cry or letting out a good laugh is getting in touch with the depths of and the beauty of life. But for me, I can't cry. If you tell me like the world is going to explode tomorrow, like I probably wouldn't cry. Like I'd have to have like a musical song in my head to get to that degree.
Mhm.
But for me, and there's a lot of stigmatization against crying, but I find that crying is, in order to really heal, you need to feel.
Yeah.
And crying is just a really good way to get in touch with the language of the soul, as is genuine great laughter. um I had an out of body experience, years later in my early 20s, and it was because out of nowhere, I just started cracking up at the top of my lungs. I know what a manic episode it is. It wasn't like a bipolar episode. I was just laughing hysterically. And what I was laughing at was how seriously we took all these things in this life that really, in the greater context, mean absolutely nothing.
I know
And
that
I
feeling.
I I looked at that and I laughed hysterically. And it wasn't like, haha, this is fun. It was like every cell in my body was laughing. And I just felt myself squeezing every little bit of pain or tension out. And all of a
Mm.
sudden, I had the most beautiful experience where I was out of my body for quite some time. And it was remarkable. But that reminded me of how much beauty is inside of us again, how much
Mhm.
we have inside of us, and how sometimes when we are just so blocked off from our energy, not able to really work on our emotions, we get very fragmented and separated from the incredible beauty within. So I think it's very important for people to really learn how to get in touch with their energy. Everyone has a different way to do that.
Mhm.
Each person has a different engine, although there's not engines that maybe in the future with electric cars, but you know what I'm saying. Um, Everyone's different, but for me, listening to music, walking, moving meditation, getting quiet, or if it's just simply placing my hand in my heart like a Reiki kind of thing, and I think of a couple things that I'm grateful for,
Yes.
and also memories, are important because memory is what brings us to this field. We're all remembering. Memory brings us curiosity to spirituality because without memory, we wouldn't be doing this. So when people ask me, how do you remember your NDE? I said, that's what brings us all to this is memory. We remember a part of us that knows more than what we were taught.
Mhm.
We're in touch with that part of ourselves that goes beyond programming. And memory is the greatest gift in the pathway to spiritual awareness, you know?
Mm,
Yeah.
so good. I am aware that time is flying by. I could listen to you for so long. In every sentence, there's just such depth that we could pull back the layers of. So I want to thank you. And I am very confident that these kernels of insight and hope and inspiration
Mhm.
foster greater curiosity and engagement. And with that, if you are listening this far, please like, subscribe, share. It really helps the channel get these magnificent stories out to help heal and provide solace and inspiration. Um, how do people connect with you? How do they learn more? What are you up to? What is your current work and agenda?
Yeah, well, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, my website is jacoblcooper.com. It's jacoblcooper.com. And there you could find my Instagram page, Facebook page. I try to do daily posts as much as I can with
Mhm.
any messages that doesn't come from me, but through me. And so, again, it's information is so pivotal in how we feel, how we behave, and our beliefs. And so I try to get out as much, good information that was meant to be told on a daily basis through, these platforms. I'm going to be at the Omega Institute coming up in October, actually, as well as the Edgar Casey Association for Research and Enlightenment. We're doing a reincarnation conference in May. So that's all on my website. And I mean, now a lot of my focus is on educating other therapists. I do a lot of
Mhm.
continuing educational
I love
courses
that.
to really give more competency over mystical experiences
Good.
because those are quite stigmatized and ostracized. And again,
Absolutely.
if we're able to get more credible information, our beliefs will change, and thus we'll be able to help out those who come in our pathway in a clinical way. Um, but yeah, I mean, I certainly, obviously, the podcast is something that I enjoy, and I am trying to work on my third book, but I have my two books up here, and I'm just celebrating my 2 year anniversary of the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, which is something I never thought possible in many ways. I was put in the lowest level of reading and writing in community college. And, but again, I always say when people limit you, it's not your limitations, it's probably theirs. And we all have so much more than how other people perceive us. And we all have the magnificence and the brilliance to us. We just have to get out of our own way, lose the ego, and just surrender to this brilliant force that we're all connected to. So,
Mhm.
Mm, beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful. Yeah. One final question. I feel like you've answered it all along, but if there's
okay.
anything else, when it is your time
Mhm.
to transition from this lifetime as Jacob L. Cooper, what do you want to be remembered for?
What would be remembered for? A lot of people know me as a near-death experience guy, but I want people to remember their through hearing me, to remember themselves, to remember who they are through hearing and remembering my story. I think the greatest gift of life is to remember who you are. That
Mhm.
is the greatest gift that we can have. And so it's not so much about me. I think hopefully through the work that people can remember who they are and how magnificent they are, and to reframe all of these BS narratives, which BS isn't a curse word, it stands for belief systems. Um, so letting go of all these belief systems, and that's how we could discover new worlds. In fact, I always try, I'm a Taurus, so we try to make things as physical as
Mhm.
possible, and you are as well. Beautiful. But, you take the planet, we had a certain level of understanding of the planet for what it was, and people saw that as flat, and people said, no, I don't think that's the case. Let's go explore. And they found the planet was not flat, and they found like other countries and other parts of the world, and it opened things up. And so a lot of people walk around, and there's still a lot of flat earthers around, don't ask me why, but there's still a lot of people who walk around like this is reality,
Yeah.
and that's it, and they're not daring enough to explore those bounds. And so that's what this lifetime is about, is every day in every way looking at life through a different lens, constantly having eternal elasticity of reality and being explorers of life. That's when you're able to really evolve, grow, and ascend, those rungs of the ladder, and to look at life. It's eternal how high you could look at life, and the vantage point is endless. So never
Infinite.
stop searching and digging within and trying to find different, perceptions of reality is what I'll say.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time. It's such a gift. It's such a true gift.
Well, thank you for all that you do. You're doing great work here.
How I Made It Through is produced and distributed by EIQ Media, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on overcoming adversity, leadership, mental health, entrepreneurship, spiritually transformative experiences, and more.